So they got to New Ulm in 1856. August needed to find a job. He was trained as a machinist, so he went to work in one of our flour mills that we had here at that time. And he worked there for a few years until he met an individual named Jacob Bernhardt. This guy came down from the Twin Cities area looking to start a brewery here in New Ulm with a business partner. So he asked August to join him, and August said certainly. Then in 1860, those two gentlemen broke ground and had the capacity to make about 200 barrels of beer in 1 year. Now they're working side by side, making a great name for this company. It was about 6 years or so they were in business together, and Jacob decided he didn't want to do it anymore. So he sold his shares of the brewery to the highest bidder, and August Schell was the highest bidder. He bought them out for $12,000. With that purchase, he got about 13 acres that included buildings, grounds, and the business were now all his. So along with his wife and two oldest daughters, they built a family home out here on site. They attached that home to the brewery and raised their children in that home. And once they built the home, of course, they did have more children. They had 4 more right here at the brewery for a total of 6 kids. 4 daughters and 2 sons. Now, only a son and daughter stayed in the business, and they're pictured down near their mom. The other 4 kids didn't stay. Well, 1 actually died. That meant 3 of the kids didn't stay. And those 3 kids went to the southern part of California, never to return. So as mentioned, 2 did stay. Otto Schell down there to the far left is one of the kids. 2 pictures to the right of him is his sister, Emma Schell Marty. So Otto would take over in the late 1800s. The brewery wasn't incorporated until 1902, so he was actually the acting president in the 1880s, all the way up until he was named as the official president in 1902. And in that time, especially in the late 1800s, he had a vision to make this brewery much different, a much bigger place overall, and to expand, of course, where they could distribute their beer. So by trade, he was an inventor, an amazing businessman, and an engineer. So he patented and designed an ammonia compressor refrigeration device that would revolutionize how they would refrigerate the beer. And of course, the family trusted what he was doing because his vision was true. They knew they were moving in the right direction with his guidance and, of course, his great business background and knowledge of engineering. And it was just a really good thing to have him on as the person. That said, it's 1911, and he's 49 years old. He unexpectedly dies. And the family's devastated because they don't really know what they're going to do. And you see the next person in line, his name is George Marty. George would marry into this family and become part of it. And of course he married Emma Schell, one of the daughters. Years before he became part of the family, he learned about this business by hanging out here at the company. He marries into the family. His true trade was pharmaceuticals, and there were no pharmacies here in town. So they moved to the Twin Cities where he could work as a pharmacist. He was a good, savvy businessman as well. When they moved there, he did very well financially and as a pharmacist or business owner. In the late 1800s, he was kind of getting ready to come back to New Ulm, where his wife was from, retire, so to speak. And he comes back to New Ulm, and he builds a house here on site as well. And once he gets settled in here, he started working at the brewery, doing things like bookkeeping, accounting, those types of things, nothing too major yet. And then Otto Schell passed away. So who better to take over than George Marty, who had that business background and knew the family and now was part of the family, of course. So he took over and said he'd do it for a few years, and then he'd step away and let other family members take over. Remember, this would be kind of a second career for him. Well, after he took over, financially, this company did very, very well. But wouldn't you know it, he never left. That is until he died in 1934, just 2 weeks after Prohibition ended. Now you got his wife taking over, Emma. She takes over and runs the company for 6 years, and it was very unique that she would run our brewery at all, for several reasons. Number one, a woman running a brewery in the 1930s was unheard of, at least we believe, until she ran our brewery here in New Ulm. In addition, she was 78 years old, and she had no idea how to brew beer. So why her? Well, she was a daughter, and by naming her as the president on paper, they could say, yes, we are still family-owned, with the hope and idea that another family member would come along and take over, not just as an on-paper president, but as an acting brewmaster as well. And they were training their son to take over at some point. His name was Al. So when his mom died in 1940, he was pushed into that role and ready to do it. So Al takes over for his mom, another family member, and runs the brewery until 1969. Now, Al had a love for music. He played multiple instruments. He was very artsy, very creative, and talented as a musician. So wouldn't you know it, he started a band. He called it the Schell's Hobo Band. And they play all over southern Minnesota still to this day. And that's all thanks to Al Marty. There's a really great hobo band display in the museum, right on the corner, or on the back side. If you walk around the back, there's all these instruments. That's from the original hobo band stuff. And of course, there's a big picture of Ted with his hat, or not Ted, Al with his hat on, in one of those pictures. It's a great display if you want to check that out after. He also added canning beer to the time that he was president here, so they added cans to the lineup. And then he retired in 1969, of course, and he passed the brewery on to another son, a family member named Warren Marty. Now, Warren was quite a character, so much so in town that he had a very fitting nickname. People called him Schmaltz, and to those locals who knew him well, he was Schmaltzy. I tell you that because every now and again, we have a beer that comes back that's in his name. It's called Schmaltz's Alt. Our current president, Ted, named that beer in honor of a great guy. The beer had a lot of character. It just needed a great name. So in the 1980s, he created that beer and named it after, in honor of a great guy, his dad, of course, Schmaltz. So Schmaltz retired in 1986. He then passed the brewery to our current president, another son named Ted Marty. Ted and his wife, Jody, have 3 sons, and their names are Jace, Kyle, and Franz. These 3 sons are getting ready to take over to become 6th generation family members to run the business. That means Ted, their dad, is a 5th generation descendant. The 2 folks up on the wall, August and Teresa Schell, then, would be Ted's great-great-grandparents. Does anybody have any questions about the family history? I'm going to cover more history about how we survived outside. All right, let's head outside. So, 160 years is a really long time to be in business. Some of those years for us were very difficult years. Meaning this, we had 3 events in our company's history where we nearly closed down. And it's amazing we actually ever made it through it all. The first of those events occurred 2 years after the brewery was founded. It was 1862, and the Dakota conflict was getting underway right here in southern Minnesota. And of course, the brewery was right in the middle of all of that. 2 years leading up to the conflict, the family became good friends with the Dakota as they traveled through this area. They were known to give them food and clothes and share other items with them, basic need things that they could have and take with them as they were headed to their next destination. That said, it's 1862, and they're given a warning to leave the property because they didn't know what would happen. So August and Teresa packed up their family and they abandoned this site for about 2 weeks. Came back out here and feared the worst, that the business is going to be destroyed and gone. But when they got back out here, it was in fine shape and had hardly been touched at all. Many historians do believe the relationship with the Dakota saved the brewery during the conflict of 1862. Better yet, their business was still here. They could go right back to brewing beer. And that's exactly what they did. They passed their first test of survival. Now our second test came some years later. It was 1919, of course, the first year of Prohibition. So that gives you some hint about what Schell's made during that time. Of course, 1919 root beer was one of the things that we made during that time. They also made other soda pops. They made near beer. They made candy products. And all those products then would carry them through those years of Prohibition, and it lasted 15 years. And most breweries in the United States just went out of business because they couldn't make other products other than beer, just chose not to, so they closed up. So Schell's made it through, and in 1934 they were able to go back to brewing beer and get back to the business, or what it was founded for. We passed our second test as well. Now the third, hopefully our final test of survival, came in the late 1960s. In 1969, light beer came out, and that light beer put all these small breweries out of business unless they made light beer. lot of them chose not to, and they closed up. And if you look at brewing history in the United States, there was a big chunk of breweries that closed in 1969 into the early 70s because of light beer. Well, Schell's didn't make a light beer right away, and they paid the price for it. And they were really struggling during that time. We were doing a lot of contract brewing. A lot of other stuff was coming our way that wasn't Schell's products, but we were still staying open, and it was a real struggle. So much so, and this is how desperate we were. We had 16 black walnut trees here in our property. So these trees right here are black walnuts in our sunken garden. The 16 they cut down were 2 to 3 times larger than these 2 trees here, telling us a lot about the value of those trees. We were told that they were some of the largest in the state of Minnesota at that time. So again, they were very valuable. But with the sale of those trees, they were able to make payroll, pay for the maintenance on the buildings and grounds here, pay for the property taxes, anything that would keep a business going. Those trees helped provide in the late 1960s till about 1977, 1978. 1978, of course, we made a light beer, and we've had one ever since that time. Schell's then passed their 3rd test, and here we stand today. Does anybody have any questions about those events at all? Easy crew, everybody wants beer. Set up this way.
I did not remember down here.
I heard you say you like Grain Belt.
Oh yes, I had it offered at my wedding.
So they're coming out with a Grain Belt seltzer.
Oh, very nice.
And a ultra light Grain Belt light beer.
That's the thing. I'm also a type 1 diabetic.
Oh, wow.
And I work heavily in pinball and pinball streaming.
Sure.
And I'm looking for something that goes very well. And the idea of a light alcohol and low carb option.
Yeah, that's exactly what I just read the specs on it today.
I look forward to hearing
It's
more.
kind of cool. Yeah, I can show you the pictures downstairs in the tap room.
Appreciate it.
All right. So here we are in the outskirts of New Ulm. When August was looking for a place to start this business, he was homesick. He missed the Black Forest of Durbach, Germany. So he comes out here and he sees this great hillside. There's a water source down by the river, or at least close to the river anyway, tucked away in the hillside, and it was really a nice private location, but it brought him back home. And that's the number one reason we're here. It brought August back to the Black Forest of Durbach, Germany. But you also have to have water, and you also have to have ice to brew. Have enough water to make the beer, of course, and then ferment and age it somehow. They had all that here on site as well. So the water they got came from the artesian wells that ran down the hillside behind the original brew house, where we're going to be heading shortly. They used that as their primary and only water source for many years. They were only making 200 barrels of beer a year. It was feasible to use it as their only water source.
What are you guys at now?
Yeah, today we're at about 160,000 barrels of beer per year. So we need a lot better water, a lot more of it. So all our water does come from downtown New Ulm today, where it's treated before it gets to the brewery, and then we filter it again once it gets here for a really good water to brew with. Now, as far as ice goes, the Cottonwood River is past that parking lot. If you continue down the hill, you would reach the river, and when ice formed at the top, they'd cut huge blocks of ice onto the river. They'd bring the ice up the hillside with the assistance of horses, store it in an ice house that used to be located just to the left of the mansion, out at the end of the gardens. The ice would stay in there during the winter months, and as the summer season or warmer weather came around, the brewing season, they'd take the ice out of that ice house and pack it into the hand-dug cave system in the basement of this building right here. So the cave system starts and it goes under the part of the brewery. So they'd put barrels in that cave, or those caves, pack ice next to the barrels, fill the barrels with a liquid that would eventually become beer, add yeast, and let it ferment and age for a period of time. After it was done aging and fermenting, they had beer, of course, and they could ship that product to people around the area that wanted it. So now they had everything they needed. Water source, ice source, and of course, August would say, you have to have a great location to make a great beer. Any questions about the location at all? So about the buildings, we're really centrally located where we're standing right now as far as the property goes as it stands with acreage today. Starting with this building right back here. The oldest building here on site is this building right here, as it is the original family home built in 1860. This is attached to the brewery over on the far right-hand side in the front with that white-colored brick or white striped brick on the top. It's always been attached to the brewery. They used that as a family home for many, many years. In the 1930s, it was converted into an office building, and that's exactly what it is today, one of our primary office buildings. Across from that building is this structure right here, which was renovated, well, let's see, it's been about 6 years now. Renovated and made as a better office space for our president, Ted. So he has his office in here along with his administrative assistants. They have a little boardroom in there and also a meeting room. And then in the basement today they have the graphic arts design department that does all the labeling, hand design, all the stuff is done in that building in the basement today. But originally the cream stucco portion that's closest to us with the little front porch on it was the boarding house that all the employees stayed in when they worked out here at the brewery back in the 1800s. And the reason they built it here on site is because the only other boarding houses in New Ulm were in downtown New Ulm, 2 miles from here, and that's a long way to walk to and from work if you're staying there. So they decided to build it here. Now they were only a few feet from the factory when it was up in production. Added on is that brick part there to the left. I mentioned that George and Emma Marty moved back to New Ulm in the late 1800s, and that's the house they built attached to this original boarding structure when they moved back to town. And they built it here on site because they wanted a place on the property to live and be a part of the business. And so they lived there for many, many years. And when they died, this whole building end to end was turned into one of our first extensive gift shops. That is until 2008, when the new gift shop was built right across from where we started our tour today. So out at the end of the gardens, one of my favorite buildings here on site, of course, is the August Schell Retirement Mansion. August Schell built that in 1885 here on site because he loved this location. He was going to retire here, and he had room at the end of his beloved gardens to do that, to build a structure. So he was part of the design, part of the paperwork, getting that structure ready. And there are slabs on the mansion inside the museum. It's a platform that opens up, and it's all in German about the mansion, but it's in there. It's all part of that mansion design. But at any rate, he built that in 1885, as mentioned, and the cost was $5,000. He only lived in the mansion for about 6 years. He died in 1891. Before he died, he wrote a Schell's decree or a Schell's law that said the only person allowed to live in this mansion is the current president. Well, that still stands today, so our president of the brewery is the only one allowed to live in the mansion. And it is written in German, of course, so it stands for many, many years. So Ted could live there, but he chooses not to for a couple of important reasons. The mansion looks very large with a lot of space. It's very small on the inside, and it needs a lot of updating. The biggest reason why is privacy, of course. There's a lot of people that come out here today. We want people to be a part of this property, explore, enjoy the gardens, walk around the mansion. You have no privacy though. That was your privacy. That's the main reason. They do use the mansion for various meetings like shareholder meetings, board of directors meetings, and they'll have private family functions in the mansion as well. Otherwise, it is closed off. Does anybody have any questions about the property, the buildings, or grounds?
Who's Bachfest?
Right here. 2 weeks, there'll be about 7,000 people right here. It is crazy. Have any of you ever been to Bachfest?
mansion for drunk people?
No.
No, I've worked here almost 12 years and I've never been in the mansion myself. That tells you they're very private about that. But yeah, it's really crazy out here in 2 weeks.
Is there any waste to the facility, and how is that handled?
What kind of waste?
Like just
Spent
process of whatever is
Spent grain they use as cattle feed on area farms, so they repurpose that.
cool.
Essentially, it's recycled, I guess, and used again. Some of the water is, that doesn't get used is then treated and recirculated again too.
Do you bottle and can on site, or do you
Everything's done on site.
And where do you get the bottles and materials from?
I always forget the name of the place. They come from separate locations, but I can't remember
Okay.
offhand.
Cool.
So we're going to go up in that direction by bottling. All right, right this way. Yeah, sorry, I can't answer.
Oh, no worries. I often ask questions that people have to look into. I do a lot of work with like East Lake Tap Room in Minneapolis. It's not too far from my house. And doing
Very cool.
Doing pinball there and working on radical inclusion pinball. I write pinball comic book guides. They take you through the areas and modes of games and teach you how to get to the wizard mode and what to do once you get there.
There's a pinball store in town that's open and operating.
24 machines.
Yeah. All right. So it was 6 years ago, and this was added on right here. This was never here. It was an open alleyway that we used to walk tours straight through. So if you were on a tour prior to that point, we used to go straight through. So they closed this area off and added our newest bottling and canning facility. Everything that's bottled or canned here, whether it's Firebrick, Greenbelt, Northeast, whatever, it's going to be done in this room right here. The machine closest to us when we walk by, you'll see, is the bottler. It'll fill and cap 350 beers per minute when it's up in production. The canning machine is right across the room from it, called a Krones canner from Germany. That machine will do about the same, 350 cans filled and sealed before both cans and bottles enter this building here. And right on the other side of this wall is a pasteurization chamber. After everything is pasteurized down at the end of this building, it's going to be labeled, packaged, loaded on a semi, and then brought to our warehouse where it'll go to distribution. after that. The area above here, they added a lab for our quality control team to do their work today. Now, part of the reason for closing this alleyway off right here was because the only other spot large enough, well, they really didn't have another spot large enough to put bottling and canning, so this made sense to have it in this area here. Another reason, of course, is that that cave system is directly below us here. By closing this area off to vehicles, there was less risk the caves would collapse. Now it's foot traffic only.
You pasteurize after bottling your candy?
Yep, that's correct.
Is it a heat process?
What's that?
Is it a heat pasteurization?
It's like a boiling. Yep, everything it goes through this long thing and it's heated up and kills anything that's left in the bottle through that pasteurization. It's not quite that easy or simple, but it's quite a process. But yeah.
Cool.
What we're going to do is we're going to walk in here. We're going to walk up about 5 steps, and if you look to the right, when we get to that little platform, there's a door that has a window that looks into large tanks. They call them resting tanks. In those tanks are beer that's going to be used for bottling and canning next. So everything in there is never more than 1 to 2.5 weeks old. It sits there because the next stop for all of it, it's not fermenting and aging in there anymore, is going to be overhead in these pipes that come right down to the bottling and canning room. And if I read the one right today when I walked through, there's these black placards that hang down. It tells you how many barrels are in there, what kind of beer it is, and when it was put in. It says Primo, which means Greenbelt Premium. So that's in one of the tanks that you can see closest to us when we walk by. Each one of those tanks, there's about, there's 8 to 12 in that room, and so the room winds all the way around. It's a big area. You just can't see it all from that door. But each one of those tanks holds between 240 and 260 barrels of beer. So check that out as we walk through. They're all full, getting ready to be bottled or canned. You ever heard of premium? Just kidding. So that thing I was just telling you about, you can see it says Primo on that tank right there.
Nice. Hey, peacocks. Are they regular residents?
Yeah, they live here year-round. Yep.
Do they have names?
They've changed. We've lost a few over the years, and I forget when they transitioned to a new one.
It's always difficult, yeah. My 5-year-old has fish.
Bro, is there anybody else coming through?
Small guy.
I thought so.
It's like Willy Wonka, we just lose people along the way.
There's different rooms. All right. So we're going to be heading up to the second story of our original brew house right here. If you don't want to take the stairs or just want to wait down here for us, you can certainly do that. We're only going to be up there for about 4 minutes or so. Once we get up to that second story, the last step up is larger than others and it's easy to trip on. Be very careful on that last step up onto the platform. Anybody get hit?
Holy cow.
Out of the blue, that stuff falls off. Sorry, maybe step this way a little bit.
You wanted warm weather.
Yeah, really. Obstacles at the Before we get up there, though, we're going to be entering this building right here. They called it the Ice Machine House, and they called it that because those original ammonia compressors that Auto Schell designed, engineered, and patented are right here when we walk in. They're colored dark red. They've got a big flywheel. There's just really cool old equipment. And they've been in here since 1895, but they were up and running about 1897. So they've been in this room for a very long time. And historically, they're very important to what we did here at the brewery so early on when that refrigeration shifted from the caves to this ammonia compressor system. So check that out as we walk through, and again, follow me.
What is this big?
I will explain that on the way back down.
smells like.
Or a bar. No, I'm just kidding. Sometimes it reminds me of a barn smell here. A milking barn.
Yeah, I grew up doing FFA, showing pigs.
Yeah.
But I can't do bucking bronco shows anymore. I smell the stress on the animals, and I'm a little too empathic for that these days.
Sure.
I do lights for them, but it allows me to keep a nice distance.
All right. So this building we're standing in is a very traditional brew house for the 1800s. And all that means is the only way they could move a liquid product was a gravity-fed, top-down brewing system. So everything, all the liquid would go through all this equipment, and then where its final resting spot was for fermentation and aging was in the building across from where we are now, where everything would ferment and age anywhere from a few days up to a few weeks. 160 years later, almost all of our product ferments and ages anywhere from a few days up to a few weeks. It hasn't changed in all those years, with the exception of this building. We no longer use this building to brew anything in today. The new brew house was built in 1999, attached to this building, further up to the right, further up on the hill on the back side of this building. Everything's done on one level. They don't need a gravity-fed system because pumps move all the liquid for them from one vessel to another on one level plane, making the gravity-fed system here obsolete. We just don't need to use it any longer. But when they did, they'd haul grain all the way up to the top, the fourth-story silo, where they'd let the grain sit until they were ready to brew beer. Once they were ready, of course, they just opened a valve, and the grain then dropped down through a pipe to the third level, or the third floor below, which is that level right there, that vessel right there, called the lauter tun. And in that lauter tun, they'd add 170-degree water and cook it down for about 2 hours, or boil it for about 2 hours. Once it was done lautering, the liquid that remained in there had a lot of sugar in it called wort. And that wort liquid is critical to brewing beer. So the wort then would drain out of there, come right over here to this brew vessel, and the spent grain then would have gone out the side of the building down to a waiting truck as cattle feed to an area farm. So once the wort was in here, they'd add hops, and they'd brew it for about another 2 hours. Once it was done brewing then, the liquid that was in here would go down to that fermentation area where they'd add yeast and then let it take on all those characteristics of whatever style it was they were making at that time for fermentation and aging. So brewing was then complete. The reason this building exists is because of Otto Schell. This copper kettle he purchased from Chicago, Illinois in 1895, and it came in several pieces. So they had to rivet it together downstairs. This building was an open shell. There were beams running through it until they got this installed. So once they had this up in position about the first level, then they poured the concrete around it. Once they had that done, then they could add everything else beyond that. So this determined the setup of this entire building. So this copper kettle would change how they would be brewing beer here, primarily because of the size. So before they had this here, they were only making 200 barrels of beer in a whole year. With the addition of this copper vessel, they were able to make about 110 barrels of beer in about 4 hours. So in about half a workday, they had nearly half a year's capacity all of a sudden because of this copper kettle. So it was a really, really good move to make. And in the 2 years they got it up and running, from 1895 to 1897, they were able to figure out their expansion area around the southern part of Minnesota. So they were going to have a lot more beer to ship. They were able to do that, purchase more horses, get more wagons, that sort of thing, and really expand their fleet overall to make this a much bigger, better brewery, of course. The big risk in adding this to the brewery, though, was the cost. It was $25,000 to install it in 1895. $20,000 more than the mansion 10 years earlier. So it was a huge risk for them to take, but a very important one. This vessel was used for about 116 years. So the use of it, they got their money out of it. Now 110 barrels of beer was about 3,500 gallons that came out of this in a full batch. To the bottle or can, they get about 38,000 12-ounce cans or 38,000 12-ounce bottles from it in a full batch of beer. Does anybody have any questions about this building, about this part of the tour?
What do they do to this to prepare it from being in use to just being a kind of historical